We're still commenting on Kant's groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, and we're now looking at categorical imperative and the metaphysics of morals. We can anticipate Kant's formulations of the categorical imperative as an unconditional universal moral law. The principle is that we are to act always and only in such a way that we can will the maxim of our actions to be a universal law for all rational beings. The interpretation and implications of the categorical imperative must be developed at length. The principle applies unconditionally to all rational agents, regardless of their circumstances, and makes it morally obligatory to do whatever actions are required by whatever moral maxims can be universalized in the sense of being willed universally as a law to be followed by all rational beings. To understand how Kant arrives at this crossroads in his metaphysics of morals and is able to put forward the categorical imperative as the universal law represented by the will in the pursuit of moral duty, we should consider Kant's several formulations of the categorical imperative in its most general terms. Kant proceeds by posing a transcendental question about the conditions of possibility for the categorical imperative, or what he calls the imperative of morality. We read, it's the green quote in front of you. On the one hand, the question of how the imperative of morality is possible is undoubtedly the only one needing a solution, since it is in no way hypothetical and the objectively represented necessity can therefore not be based on any presumption, as in the case of hypothetical imperatives. Only, we must never leave out of account here that it cannot be made out by means of any example. And so, empirically, whether there is any such imperative at all, but it is rather to be feared that all imperatives which seem to be categorical may yet in some hidden way be hypothetical. For example, when it is said, you ought not to promise anything deceitfully, and one assumes that the necessity of this omission is not giving counsel for avoiding some other ill, in which case what is said would be, you ought not to make a lying promise, lest if it comes to light, you destroy your credit. But that an action of this kind must be regarded as in itself evil, and that the imperative of prohibition is therefore categorical. Kant predictably concludes that the categorical imperative cannot be fully or correctly explained by empirical methods, but must be understood a priori. He warns against mistaking hypothetical imperatives for the categorical imperative, thus recognizing the problem of correctly construing the categorical imperative to avoid hidden conditionalization. He downgrades all such principles as mere principles of the will, which he distinguishes from genuine moral laws when he writes this one, which is now colored blue in front of you. We shall thus have to investigate entirely a priori the possibility of a categorical imperative, since we do not here have the advantage of its reality being given in experience, so that the possibility would be necessary not to establish it, but merely to explain it. In the meantime, however, we can see this much, that the categorical imperative alone has the tenor of a practical law. All the others can indeed be called principles of the will, but not laws. As a further basis for distinguishing between hypothetical imperatives and the categorical imperative, Kant mentions that the content of a hypothetical imperative is obscure unless or until its condition is clarified. The problem is that hypothetical imperatives are often formulated without their conditions being made explicit. In the case of the example we have already considered, like always wear your seatbelt, or practice gun safety, or check and reconfirm your flight, a more complete and correct statement of these imperatives would need to be preceded by the appropriate conditions under which each of these imperatives becomes a command as a means to an end in the service of the good. We need in all these cases to add the clause if you want to avoid injury and so on. So if Kant is right, all such means ends imperatives fall under the general condition or hypothesis. If you want to be happy and promote the happiness of others, then you need to wear your seatbelt or practice ground safety or check and reconfirm your flight. In contrast with this situation involving hypothetical imperatives, Kant says that the entire content of the categorical imperative is transparent immediately upon grasping any of its formulations. The obvious reason is that the categorical imperative, unlike hypothetical imperatives, is unconditional, and thus, if adequately expressed at all, has no component of its expression that can remain hidden or implicit. That's why Kant will say, and it's now in the pink bold in front of you, when I think of a hypothetical imperative in general, I do not know beforehand what it will contain. I do not know this until I am given the condition. But when I think of a categorical imperative, I know at once what it contains. For since the categorical imperative contains beyond the law only the necessity that the maxim be in conformity with this law, while the law contains no condition to which it would be limited, nothing is left with which the maxim of action is to confirm, but the universality of a law as such, and this conformity alone is what the imperative properly represents as necessary. Summarizing this line of argument, Kant concludes again that there can only be one categorical imperative. He presents the categorical imperative in the form we have already seen in his distinction between hypothetical imperatives and the categorical imperative. This is the formula by which the moral law, as opposed to appeals to inclination in motivating moral action, is supposed to be universalizable. The categorical imperative, accordingly, requires that we act only according to those maxim or moral rules guiding our moral conduct that can be universalized in the sense of being such that we can will the rules in question to be universally followed by all rational moral agents. It's now in yellow in front of you. There is therefore only a single categorical imperative there, that's singular, and it is this: act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law. Act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it becomes a universal law. It's worth repeating One more time, act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it becomes a universal law. Act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it becomes a universal law. Act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law. Act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law. And lastly, act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law. Sometimes by repeating it a number of times, we get to memorize it also. The purely formal nature of Kant's categorical imperative is manifested in the following characterization. Kant maintains, and it is now in color green in front of you. Green. Since the universality of law, in accordance with which effects takes place, constitutes what is properly called nature in the most general sense, that is, the existence of things insofar as it is determined in accordance with universal laws, the universal imperative of duty can also go as follows. Act as if the maxim of your action were to become by your will a universal law of nature. The categorical imperative is expressed in Kant's passage in its most familiar and informative version. Kant declares that we are unconditionally morally obligated as a matter of duty, regardless and independently of any inclination or accompanying feeling or emotion, to act only from those maxims that can be willed to be universal laws. What exactly does this mean? And in what exact sense is the categorical imperative in this formulation supposed to be a formalistic moral principle? To answer these questions, we should next consider four applications of the categorical imperative which Kant describes in order to see how the categorical imperative works when it is put to practical use. When we have clarified Kant's concept of the categorical imperative and understood the logical mechanism of universalizability that makes his moral philosophy formalist, we will finally be in a position to evaluate his deontological ethics from the standpoint of criticisms that have sometimes been raised against the categorical imperative. We'll close this section of our discussion for now. I hope you'd subscribe, like, or even share this post. And thank you for supporting Samo't sa simula. Maraming salamat po.